I would like to start off by addressing the two speakers. I think that's a good way to start. And first of all, I can assure Fatih Birol that we have adopted the climate change challenge in Norway. And we agree that the world needs less CO2 and probably more electricity and therefore more grid. And that's why we embarked last year on a rather ambitious plan to what we call create the next generation grid in Norway. And we are planning to spend around 5 billion euros from now until 2020. So that relates to the figures we heard earlier. Yes, we have adopted the challenge, and it will be a very decisive factor on the development of the grid in Norway and the connections between Norway and our neighboring countries. My second comment is to Philip Lowe, who is not any longer here now, but I will assure him that indeed a focus on infrastructure works. It works. We have done it before, actually, in the Nordic area. We started in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland as early as 1995, a rather ambitious project to integrate the Nordic electricity market. And that part of that was actually defining a few very important interconnections which need to be in place for this market to function. And most of those investments have been made. And indeed, I think the Nordic electricity market is a very good example of what you can realize in terms of economic gains, in terms of security of supply, and in terms of climate. So yes, it works, but it is hard work, and I guess you have to have a clear view on where you want to go. And in our case, we really wanted to create one integrated Nordic electricity market without any borders. And then, yes, indeed, it costs money. I think that is a point which was made by several speakers today. Without starting a long debate about the figures, I would just remind the audience that the figure which is quoted on infrastructure, I think in the paper, from now until 2020, I think it's about 300 billion euros, the part on infrastructure. I guess it's about the same what Europe spends today every year on defense. So it just gives you a way to look at this. Second example on that, in Norway, the Norwegian consumer pays about 0.4 euro cent per kilowatt hour for the services we provide him or her. And that figure will probably rise until about 1 euro cent in 2020. So that's for the customer to be able to have this grid with a high level of security, this grid which enables to create value, and this grid which also then contributes to good climate solutions. So on a micro perspective, I think also the costs are not unsurmountable. Then I think indeed I would like to round off by just giving you this one good example of what an integrated market means in practice. On the 6th of February this year, we had one of the coldest days in Norway. Actually, at 9 o'clock in the morning, we had a record high electricity consumption. And at that single hour, we imported quite some electricity from Sweden. We imported also quite some electricity from Denmark. And then we turned around and exported, actually through one of our cables, electricity to the Netherlands. And why was that? Yes, of course, it was very cold in Norway, and at a very cold hour, even Norway needs to import electricity. But it was also cold in Denmark. So why could Denmark export electricity to Norway? Well, in Denmark, there is a lot of combined heat and power, which is part of the Danish policy to increase energy efficiency. And when it is very cold, you have to really fire up your combined heat and power plants in order to supply heat to the homes. But if you increase the production of heat, you also increase the production of electricity. at the same hour, it started blowing in Denmark. So in Denmark, suddenly there was a surplus of electricity because of high combined heat and power generation due to the cold and the wind which was blowing. What do you do then? Yes, you turn around and you send the excess electricity to Norway. And what do the Norwegians? Yes, they turn around and sell it to the Dutch and make some money on it, which is actually a Dutch way of doing things. And I think this, if you just look at this example of how this integrated market works, indeed it provides us in Norway at that single hour with the security of supply we needed, because it was a very cold day and we actually needed the electricity at that single hour. But it also provided what I would call value creation, because we utilized each other's systems in a better way. We were able actually to import excess wind power, and we turned around and sent it to the Dutch and made some money on it, which I think is a good way of value creation. And then finally, it's about climate solutions, good climate solutions. And why do I say the last one? Yes, in the first place, Denmark would not have been able to build all those windmills if it had not been because of the interconnectors we built from Denmark to Norway many years ago. There are already three interconnectors between Norway and Denmark. And those interconnectors were a decisive part of the Danish strategy, actually, to convert its energy system into a much more renewable system, where they embarked on a huge investment in wind power. And definitely, you can't build your electricity system on wind if you don't have a good connection to a hydro power system, as Norway has. So this was a kind of call it a payback. The cables, the interconnectors, were built in the first place to enable the Danes to convert their energy system, which I think Europe wants to do. And then when it actually was converted, it could support Norway in a very, very cold hour. And I think this is the type of examples you will see also in Europe to a much higher extent when you start interconnecting your markets even more. And again, this point about costs, yes, it is costly, but as I pointed out, there are also some economic benefits actually, which might help to make those investments. I think in a couple of years from now, on a sunny, windy day in Germany, probably more than half of the electricity production will come from renewables. And to my mind, that is a kind of revolution. Another example of the silent revolution is that we witness actually already today negative prices on the power exchange in the Nordic markets. I gave you earlier today this example on the wind, not necessarily saving Norway, but it helped Norway on a very cold day. There are other examples where there is simply no market to actually take this excess wind into use, and then the market tells you that the price should be negative. And actually we have experienced several instances where prices on the spot exchange were negative. So I think we are actually witnessing a revolution, but this is a silent revolution. And probably, I agree, it should stay silent, because otherwise we can get a lot of negative reactions after that.